So, I doubt this is gonna qualify as a hot take, but like, how did we get a movie series this good? How? How? How?
How? I don't know!
The Kung Fu Panda trilogy is a masterpiece? I think a lot of people are in agreement on this, and they have fond memories of the series, but they just never really talk about it. And look, I know I'm starting to get a little stuckmanized with the amount of times I mentioned growing up with something, but I did kinda grow up with Kung Fu Panda. I remember having this Happy Meal action figure for years. And I still sleep with this Tigress plush toy every night. Anyway, I've been planning to cover this series on my channel for almost 3 years at this point. It is one of my all-time faves, but this was the month that I finally got around to doing it. At least I managed to be the first Kung Fu Panda video on YouTube. Hey man, all I hope is that having 2 Kung Fu Panda videos up at the same time sparks some kind of Kung Fu Panda-sance with viewers. I've been dying for a while to talk about what makes this trilogy so awesome, but not just in the broad, this thing good sense. I want to talk about the specific ways these movies use the animated art form to the max, the influences that make them so great, and the profound themes found in all 3 installments. Let's talk about Kung Fu Panda. It's been over 11 years since the first Kung Fu Panda came out. That movie is from another decade, and yet I still feel like the animation could hold up today. No live-action remake necessary! I mean, look at this animation. Tell me that's not beautiful. Sorry, I put in the wrong disc. In retrospect, the first film stands out even more when you compare it to the other animated movies that were being released in the late 2000s. When your animation choices look like Madagascar 2, Escape to Africa, Bolt, The Tale of Despero, Monsters vs. Aliens, and Space Chimps? An alternative that looks like this is pretty striking. Part of that came from animators who really cared about what they were making. Part of it also came from a CEO named Jeffrey Katzenberg who really wanted this movie to do well. You know the story of this series. Po is a fat fanboy panda who accidentally becomes the fabled dragon warrior and has to learn Kung Fu to be a hero. Every time people bring up the Kung Fu Panda series, I mention how it's kind of like a new take on Star Wars for this generation in more ways than one. Kung Fu in these movies has a ton of similar vibes as the Force and the Jedi. Tai Lung and Shifu have a relationship majorly reminiscent of Anakin and Obi-Wan. Oogway is basically Master Yoda. And on a bigger level, the first movie is a great hero's journey beginning, the second movie is a much darker, better, and more character-focused sequel, and the third movie is about the hero and their dad, but it's also the weakest one because it spends too much time with a village of cuddly animals. Does that sound familiar to anyone? I think in some ways, the Kung Fu Panda trilogy is the closest an American animation studio has ever gotten to making something that echoes Studio Ghibli. Sure, it has a lot more Western slapstick and overall plot than something Ghibli would ever make, but the visuals themselves and the world of China that the series constructs can only be described as magical realism, much like the worlds and visuals of Ghibli. And really, the world of the Kung Fu Panda trilogy is one of the areas aided the most by its animation. It's so good. One of Ghibli's biggest strengths, and we've talked about this in other videos, is their ability to construct places, settings, and stories that feel like they've existed long before the film began, and will continue to exist long after it ends. Kung Fu Panda does this same thing beautifully, both in the grander sense that this Kung Fu universe has a sprawling off-screen mythos and history, and also in the sense that each location feels real and tactile and lived in. There's the Valley of Peace in the first film, with its humble villagers, noodle shops, and quaint environments. The Jade Palace, with its ancient and imperial architecture and venerated spiritual backdrop. The massive Gongmen City, with its towering buildings and bustling streets. And the Panda Village, with houses that feel hand-built and rope bridges connecting cliffside shacks. The animators on the trilogy took several trips to China over the course of each production and modeled lots of the environments and architecture on real things they saw. The movies have a very awe-inspiring natural world too, with mountains and deserts and valleys modeled off real places in Asia. Of course, like, the China we see in the Kung Fu Panda series is not the historically accurate rendition of ancient China by any stretch. It's more of a mythologized and romanticized vision of the idea of ancient China. Production designer Raymond Zibok said the team was inspired heavily by watercolor paintings and ancient Chinese art, and even the abstract work of American artists like Disney's Mary Blair. With most movies, you'll look at the concept art and think, man, the final product was a big downgrade from that. What artists depict in an abstract painting often has to be dumbed down and made more realistic when it's actually put to screen. But with the Kung Fu Panda movies, you look at the concept art and the final product is just as impressionistic and beautiful, if not more so. And that's the beautiful balance that Kung Fu Panda achieves. Much like Ghibli, these settings and environments feel like very real places you could actually visit and touch. But they don't let their grounding in reality keep them from going all out with that otherworldly, artful exaggeration that only animation could do. The sun would never look that big in real life, but that doesn't take me out of the story or make it feel less real. That draws me further in. Like all great art, it evokes the feeling of the thing without worrying about the strict realism. All three movies also have a distinct and intentional color theory uniting them. Gold represents heroism and good guys. Red represents power and control. Blue represents evil and revenge. Green represents wisdom and usually associates itself with Master Oogway. Okay, here's a fun little tidbit. In the first two movies, Oogway is the one who's constantly associated with the color green. But in the third movie, when Kai takes Oogway's chi and tries to destroy his legacy, he steals the green color for himself and it becomes associated with him. I'm not pulling the whole Studio Ghibli comparison out of nowhere, by the way. The directors of all three movies have all cited Miyazaki at one time or another as a major influence on their art. I think this is really cool. The first two Kung Fu Panda movies end with visual storytelling during the credits that keeps the narrative going past its ending, which was actually a direct nod to Miyazaki's work like Kiki's Delivery Service, which does the same thing. Kiki stands, where you at? Anime in general was cited as a big source of inspiration for the strikingly awesome dream sequence that opens the first film and really reminds you just how great 2D animation can really be. It's so cool. Even cooler, this stuff was actually animated by James Baxter, who did movies like Beauty and the Beast and Prince of Egypt. The second movie opens with a shadow puppet sequence, which was another callback to ancient China and a way to bookend the film with something unique. 2D animation is just used really well throughout all these movies. The second film builds on Poe's dream sequence in the first by depicting his traumatic childhood memories in beautiful 2D. It really does a great job of showing how his recollections of the past are so abstract and elusive that he can't place them in reality. Once his vague memories of his mother come back into focus, the animation does too. But the animation in this trilogy does more than just construct a world. It also aids the action within that world. And when I say action, I mean action. Action. Where's the title card? Action! I really adore animation, but there are very few mainstream animated movies I can think of whose best action sequences compare to the best action sequences in live-action films. There are a good many exceptions, though. The 100-mile dash scene in The Incredibles, the train chase in Wallace and Gromit, the final act of Into the Spider-Verse, just all of it, and then basically everything in the Kung Fu Panda series. And Lord, so many iconic action sequences. There's the incredible Tai Lung prison escape scene, which was designed to be like a video game with levels to clear, and visually paint a battle between blue and red. This tiger improvised his way out of prison all because of one feather. There's the rope bridge fight with the Furious Five, which features thrilling choreography and use of the set piece, and was described by the animators as the single most demanding and complex sequence in the whole film. There's Shifu's fight with Tai Lung, which has so many raw moments and images that tell a story, it blows my mind. The opening battle with the wolves in Kung Fu Panda 2, which brings Poe's original dream of fighting alongside the Five in the first movie to life and shows he's living it out. The collapsing tower scene where the heroes have to run up the building as it crashes to the ground. Poe's stand against Shen's entire army, deflecting the cannonballs when he finds inner peace. And in the third movie, the battles in the spirit realm that put Doctor Strange to shame. So we talked before about how these movies balance realism with cartoonish animation, and nowhere is that more clear than in the action. The wonderful thing about these fights is they could never work as well in live action as they do in animation. This action is campy and over the top. And if these movies were depicting real humans in realistic scenarios, characters fighting upside down, crashing through the ceiling, or running up a collapsing building would almost immediately jump the shark into ridiculousness. But in animation, these scenarios play perfectly normal. They're heightened and silly, sure, but they never lose their sense of tangibility, because that tangibility exists in a world that has been created from scratch.
The choreography is so great too. Every punch feels kinetic, every fight uses its set piece to its advantage, and at every turn, it emphasizes the individual fighting styles of each animal and forces them to clash.
Shen uses peacock feathers to distract his opponents before a surprise attack, which mimics a real kung fu fighting style involving fans. Crane uses his wings to push the boats together, something no other character could have done. Viper strangles Tai Lung and makes him punch himself. Mantis sneaks out of his cage to avoid detection and prevents a cannon from firing. Tigress uses her strength and speed to boost Po to catch up with an enemy. And of course, the entire trilogy sees Po learning to use his own physical characteristics to his advantage, despite how different he is from other animals. But more on that later. Another cool thing is how often real animal growls and vocalizations are incorporated into the sound design of the fights. It serves like a subtle reminder that, especially with the villains, there's still a raw and instinctual nature buried deep down. While we're talking about individual fighting styles, though, let's get into how the animation elevates the characters. The fact that these movies have animals as characters at all is a testament to something only animation could achieve. I mean, you could do that in live action, but I don't really think it's the best idea. The character designs of the animals in Kung Fu Panda are another example of perfectly balancing realism with cartoonification. Before movies like Rango and Zootopia, Kung Fu Panda was one of the first computer-animated films to feature animals wearing clothes over their fur, which posed a huge challenge and tons of extra rendering time. The designs of the characters are all so memorably constructed and express so much personality without even opening their mouths, something that can't be said of every animated animal movie. Look at this gorilla from Sing. Look at this dog from The Secret Life of Pets. Now look at the designs from Kung Fu Panda. Which ones convey more character? You look at a guy like Master Oogway and you know everything you need to know about him instantly. For me, the Furious Five are practically an iconic and memorable superhero team on par with the Avengers. And the same is true of the villains. Ugh, the villains in these movies. They're so good. Tai Lung is this brutal animal and terrifying tank who seems completely unstoppable from minute one. Shen is this totally manipulative and narcissistic diva who brings more of an intellectual threat than his predecessor, though he's also pretty formidable on his own. Kai is a literal raging bull who demonstrates his strength by taking down Oogway in the first scene.
The opponents of all three movies are so delightfully evil and instantly iconic that they immediately bring to mind classic Disney villains like Jafar and Scar and Ursula and Shere Khan. In fact, when you look at lots of Disney and Pixar's more recent villains, many of whom have been twist reveals in the third act, the Kung Fu Panda villains stand out even more because they get to relish their evil every second of the way. Doesn't hurt that they're voiced by these guys either.
The only reason you're still alive is that I find your stupidity mildly amusing.
I gotta say, despite the first Kung Fu Panda's pretty all-star voice cast, it's one of the few animated movies of that era where the famous actors pretty much disappear into their roles for me. Po is a character who was practically made for Jack Black, but yet when I watch him, I don't spend every second thinking about how it's Jack Black. I'm just watching Po. I think a lot of this comes from the character design and the way they can emote and act even without words. It's pure magic, and it really shows what animation can do when you embrace it wholeheartedly. At first glance, it might look like the Kung Fu Panda series is built around a pretty common trope in fantasy movies. You know the one. This character is a normal guy, but one day he finds out there's a prophecy that says he's the most important person in the universe and he's destined to save the world. All he has to do is believe in himself and he'll unlock his magical powers, fulfill his destiny, and become the chosen one.
The thing is, that's not what this trilogy is really about at all.
Contrary to most Chosen One narratives, Po is not a miraculously or supernaturally gifted hero. He never unlocks a superpower that somehow makes him muscular and nimble like everyone else. He doesn't have the same skills that other Kung Fu masters have. And while he definitely learns and improves throughout all 3 movies, he never magically transforms into a fearless badass like the Furious 5. He's still fat and innocent and fanboyish. He just learns to embrace those traits rather than try to escape them, to see the potential and purpose in the things he can't change about himself. In the second movie, he makes peace with the fact that he can't change or undo the pain of the past, but it has made him who he is today, and good has come out of it. After he embraces what he can't change, Po realizes that his weight is not really a problem. Everyone bullies him constantly for being flabby and big belly, but as he discovers in the third movie, looking big and cuddly is not an unhealthy problem for him. It's something inherent to being a panda in the first place. And Po's bouncy resilience actually gives him an advantage over his foes, especially when he discovers that his fat prevents him from being affected by Tai Lung's nerve attack. Po shatters all preconceived notions of what a Kung Fu master should look like. And that's a philosophical value the movie holds and establishes even outside of his character. Oogway, the creator of Kung Fu and the greatest master to ever live, is a tortoise, which immediately brings to mind parables like the tortoise and the hare. He's the slowest, most unlikely animal of all, and yet he's also the most spiritual and the most powerful. But that's just the small potatoes look at the message of the series. The philosophy of the Kung Fu Panda trilogy in a grander sense is about relinquishing control over life and seeing purpose, potential, and destiny in everything and everyone. And it's all summed up in one line. It's a line Oogway says in the first movie, when Shifu is frustrated that Po was only chosen as the Dragon Warrior by accident.
Master, that panda is not the Dragon Warrior. He wasn't even meant to be here. It was an accident.
There are no accidents.
It's understandable why Shifu feels the way he does. It seems like a coincidence that Po landed in front of Oogway that day. But Oogway isn't just saying that there are no accidents. As Shifu discovers, what he's really saying is that if you're willing to have faith and believe that there are no accidents, every apparent accident can be your destiny. Sometimes the supernatural forces at play, God, the universe, fate, whatever you want to call it, do their best work through events that seem like accidents. You just have to let go of the illusion of control and see the purpose and potential in everything. Oogway was right in saying that Po's appearance at the ceremony was no accident either. He didn't magically drop out of the sky, but he did strap fireworks to a chair, all because he was willing to blow himself up just to get a chance to see his Kung Fu heroes. That was no accident. It was the passion that proved he deserved to be the Dragon Warrior. He just needed someone like Oogway, and later Shifu, who was willing to see greatness in him. We all need people like that. Shifu lets go of control in the first movie by accepting the hand he's been dealt and willingly training Po despite his doubts about him. And to do it, he has to take a very different approach. He trains him by using food, which wasn't exactly in the manual. In the third movie, the idea that anyone can learn Kung Fu is brought to the forefront as Po trains the Panda Village to fight Kai. And how does he do it? By accepting what he can't change, seeing potential in what he's got, and training everyone according to their giftings, much like Shifu did for him all those years ago. As a person of faith, the biggest revelation I've had in recent years is that oftentimes the most divine and miraculous things can seem mundane, ordinary, or accidental at first glance. And if you want to think they're mundane, they'll stay that way. They only manifest as divine and miraculous if you're open to believing that they are. And people are often the same way. The trilogy ultimately concludes on a message of inclusivity and universality, where Kung Fu goes from an elite and exclusive practice in the first movie to something taught and embraced by all the citizens of the valley in their own unique ways. It's the natural progression of a series that promoted the idea of finding significance and destiny in everything. It ends with Po, Shifu, and the Furious Five finding significance in every one. And that significance, that sense that everything might be divine and destined and purposed if you allow it to be, spreads across all of China. And it's why Kung Fu Panda is so great. Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 had a female director. Hans Zimmer and John Powell's score is amazing. I saw some concept art for a themed Kung Fu Panda land, and I can't stop thinking about it. Sorry, I just make a lot of notes for these videos, and sometimes I can't figure out how to include them all without just shouting random things out.
If you made it to the end of this video, comment your favorite member of the Furious 5 down below. I think we've already established that mine is Tigress. If you enjoy what you see, there's gonna be more where that came from. I'm going full-time on YouTube until 2020, so subscribe, Patreon, all that stuff that you know about, and yeah, I think that's it. I'll see you in the next one, and I guess I'll say it, skadoosh.